The wind came early that winter, like it was seeing ahead to make sure no one lingered in the wrong place too long. It didn't whisper through the cottonwoods or drift gently across the porch rails. It slammed against Etta Moore's cabin like it had a grievance with the walls. Snow followed fast behind it, dry and sharp, flung sideways in sheets that made it near impossible to see past the gate. Etta had sealed the windows herself in October, stuffed the cracks with moss and rags, nailed down the loose shingles with hands that still carried the calluses from burying her husband 2 winters before. She didn't ask for help, didn't answer to Wadeen. The land had taken William Quinn, one way or another, and all it left her was this cabin. 4 walls of dry timber, a stove that smoked when the wind turned, and silence so thick it felt like a presence. She liked it that way most days. That night, the storm hit like a hammer, the kind of cold that crept under doors and into your teeth. She was by the stove, nursing the last of the black bean stew, when she heard it. The knock. 3 short raps, then 4 more. Deliberate, ceased, not frantic. Etta froze, spoon halfway to her mouth. It had been months since anyone had come near the place, and the last time someone knocked after dark. It had been a railman with frostbitten fingers and no intention of paying for the bread he ate. She set the bowl aside slowly and reached for the rifle leaning by the hearth. Unloaded. She didn't have much use for bullets anymore. What she needed most, no lead could solve. The knock came again. She stood, crossed the room in slow, practiced steps, her boots whispering against the wooden floor. The latch felt cold against her palm, and for the briefest moment, she wondered what William would have done. He would have opened the door. Etta did too. 10 men stood in the storm, their shapes thick with layers of canvas, oilskin, fur. Snow clung to their shoulders and brows like they'd wrestled the mountain down the ridge. At the front stood a mice who didn't look old, but wasn't young. Mid-40s maybe. Trim beard, tailored coat, hat pulled low. He didn't smile, but he didn't leer either. "Evening, ma'am," he said, voice cutting clean through the wind. "Name's Merritt Sloan. Sorry to bother, but we got turned round in this storm. Horses are spooked, trails gone, and we've a few fellas near froze. We ain't looking for trouble, just a night by the fire." Etta scanned their faces, all white men, all tired, some more wary than others. She let her eyes land on each one. That was the thing about being alone. You learn to read people like weather. One stood apart not physically, but in air. He wasn't as bundled, didn't meet her gaze full on, but didn't flinch from it either. Mid-30s, dark hair, narrow face, and eyes like thawing river stones. Something about him felt quiet, not in the way that hides, but the way that watches. "Just one night?" Etta asked flatly. Merritt nodded. "Just one. We'll be gone by sunup if the storm breaks." Etta stepped aside. "Leave your boots and guns at the door." They obeyed without comment. That told her enough. Men who mean harm rarely follow rules before the fire's lit. Inside, the air changed fast. The heat from the stove rose higher, curling into the corners as the men arranged themselves, like they'd done this before. A few rubbed their hands together. Another let out a low groan as he sank to the floorboards near the hearth. No one spoke much. One passed around a small tin of jerky. Another passed out. Etta watched from the edge of the room, arms crossed, measuring. Merritt removed his coat carefully, folded it once, and met her eyes. "We won't take more than space and warmth. Ma'am, appreciate the roof." She gave a small nod, then turned toward the back room. She didn't sleep. Instead, she sat by the window with a wool blanket over her shoulders, staring into the blur of snow pressed against the glass. Her reflection stared back, A woman carved thinner by winter and time. She kept listening for footsteps, for voices too low to mean good, but all she heard was the crackle of wood and the occasional sigh of a man who hadn't felt warmth in days. Just before dawn, she returned to the main room. 9 of the 10 were asleep, scattered like drifted snow. The 10th, the quiet one, sat near the stove, legs crossed, watching the flames like they had answers to questions he hadn't asked in years. Etta stood there a beat too long. He glanced up. "You didn't sleep," he said. "Neither did you." He nodded once. "Name's Thomas Reddan." She didn't offer hers. He didn't press. Instead, he looked back at the fire. Something about the way he sat unarmed, unguarded, but not careless, told her he was used to rooms like this. Not with 10 men, not with storms outside, but with truth circling somewhere between the rafters and the floorboards, waiting for someone to speak first. Etta didn't. She turned, made coffee from the last of the grounds, poured only 1 cup, and set it down beside him. He looked up once more. "Thanks." She didn't answer, just walked away. But in the space between silence and dawn, something unspoken had already shifted like the wind outside, had knocked loose not just a door, but something deeper, something that had been sealed for too long. By morning, the storm had quieted, but it left its mark like a scar across the land. The sky was the color of cold iron, still and heavy. The wind had hushed, but in its silence lingered a kind of warning. Josiah was the first to open the door, still rubbing sleep from his eyes, boots half-laced. He didn't knock, just leaned forward, cracked the door, and peered outside. What he saw made his breath catch. "Trail's gone," he muttered. Snow took out the cutback by the ridge. Half the bluff looks like it slid off in the night. Merritt stood from his bedroll, stepped past Etta without a word, and moved onto the porch. He scanned the pale expanse. Snow drifted knee-high. The trees bent low under their own weight. One of the horses snorted, stomping nervously. Another lay half-buried, sides barely rising. Josiah turned back to the group, then toward Etta, standing in the threshold, arms folded like crossed steel. "If we leave now," he said, "we're asking the mountain to bury us." The room fell still. You could hear someone shifting in their blanket. Merritt turned toward Etta, voice steady. "We'll need to stay. 1 more night. Maybe 2. Long enough for the trail to hold again. I don't ask it lightly." Etta didn't blink. She looked past him at the drift swallowing her fence post, then at the 10 men who'd already filled too much of her quiet. She didn't nod, but she didn't say no. Instead, she said, "You'll chop wood, fetch water. No one stands idle." Merritt inclined his head. "Fair." She met his eyes. "No guns inside." He hesitated, then understood. Just like that, the one-night shelter became something else longer, quieter, uncertain. By midday, the snow had hardened into a crust thick, sharp, unyielding. It pressed down on the land, on the roof, on the bones of anyone who dared breathe too loud. Inside, the cabin felt smaller than ever. The fire crackled in fits. 10 men sat or leaned or lingered, their presence too solid for so little space. Etta laid out 3 more blankets, not out of kindness, because the cold was cruel to everyone. And she had learned that mercy wasn't weakness if it kept the roof from catching fire. Since William died, the cabin had always felt too wide. Now, with boots lined up near her stove and breath fogging her windows, it felt like a lung already full. They were courteous enough. No one shouted, no one rifled through her things, but still they were men. And men didn't need to be cruel to be dangerous. Just knew it. She moved like water around them, quiet, certain, eyes always watching, hands always busy. She boiled water, passed out bread, didn't linger near the fire. She offered no names and asked for none in return. Merritt, ever the gentleman of convenience, made himself comfortable. He praised her cabin, asked idle questions. He tapped a finger along the edge of her table, like he was measuring grain quality. "Your husband built this?" he asked. "Too smooth." She met his gaze. "He did. You've kept it strong." She didn't reply. Later, while she poured hot water into the basin, she overheard two younger men murmuring near the window. One nudged the other, pointing toward the cedar carving on the mantel, a small horse, rough but true. The last thing William ever shaped with his hands. "He used to work with Quinn, didn't he, eh?" The second replied. "Word is he fell off Ridgeback Bluff. No body, just a trail of blood and a torn boot." Etta didn't move. She didn't drop the kettle, but her knuckles went white against the iron. They knew him. William. One of them had stood near him, maybe the day he died. That wasn't coincidence. And Merritt, with his soft voice and too straight smile, hadn't just wandered here by chance. That night, Etta couldn't sleep. She lay wrapped in wool, staring into the rafters. The fire had dulled to ember glow. Her breath rose in little ghosts above her lips. Outside, the wind had softened, but the cold pressed in closer, more patient. Then smoke. Not wood smoke. Something sharper, bitter. She sat up fast. Her boots hit the floorboards with barely a creak. The smoke wasn't coming from the chimney. It leaked from beneath the stove low. Sinister. She crouched down, searching. A spark had jumped, caught on lint or rag beneath the hearth. Then a shape moved beside her. Thomas Reddan. No boots, no noise. Just him. Crouched, cloth in hand, already stamping down the ember. He didn't speak. He just worked fast. Efficient. They moved in unison. By the time the last ember hissed out, they were both crouched side by side in silence. Could have taken the whole place. She muttered. He nodded. Fast fire's a quiet thief. She turned toward him. For the first time, really looked. His face was lean, shadowed, hands calloused. His shirt was frayed. His sleeves rolled like he was always halfway between rest and work. No smell of liquor. No grin. Just tired eyes and something quiet behind them. You knew him, Thomas paused. Yes. William. Yes, he said again, voice low. She didn't ask more. She just stood and walked away, heart heavy with a question she wasn't ready to ask aloud. The next morning, as the others stirred and groaned and pulled on their boots, Etta moved like the cabin was hers again. She poured water, handed out bread, eyes steady. Only when she passed the tin cup to Thomas did her fingers brush his. He didn't flinch. She didn't either. Something in the way he looked at her felt like memory, not lust, not pity, recognition. And she couldn't say yet whether that made her feel seen or seen through. But one thing was clear. Not all men breathe the same. Some take space, some steal it. And one, at least, knew how to leave silence intact. By midday, the cabin was tense as a rattlesnake wound tight in its own coil. The storm outside had pulled its breath away, leaving only battered drifts and icy shadows. Etta watched the men move through her space, like ghosts she didn't invite, but could no longer ignore. She'd grown quieter in the aftermath of last night's fire. Something shifted between her and Thomas. He no longer seemed just another man in the cabin. The weight of his silence was heavier than the winter air. She stood by the hearth, hands busy wiping the rim of a bowl, feeling eyes on her. Not all eyes, but several that flitted to her then away, like moths disturbed by the flicker of lamplight. It was then she saw it, a flash of red cloth, hanging from under a coat brim, a name sewn in thread that glowed in the oil lamp's glow, William. Her heart skipped. Red cloth. Blood. A handkerchief. She moved like a sleepwalker, crossing the room while voices faltered and breath caught. Her eyes locked on Merritt, who stood near the door, coat slung over his arm. He met her gaze, calm, steady, as if nothing was amiss. She slid between the men, claiming no right, but taking every inch of presence until she stood before him. "There's a handkerchief with my husband's name on it," she said, voice low and smooth. "Care to explain why William's belongings are in your pocket?" The cabin fell still enough to hear the stove's hiss. Merritt met her eyes. "William lost it on Ridgeback Bluff," he said. "Dropped it in the muck. I found it in the creek when I pulled your husband out." Etta studied his face. She didn't raise her voice. Her control was cold and exact, but she stripped his story, piece by piece, without a body. She murmured, "You recovered him?" He nodded. "There was no body. Not then." Her next question burned in her quiet. "Then why bring it now?" She watched Merritt's expression shift the slightest quiver under practiced calm. He laid the handkerchief on the table. "Because," he said, "this ground holds more than lost bodies. Wounds, too." His words settled over them, blunt as axe heads through ice. A few men moved. Josiah stepped forward, as if to stand with Merritt. But something stalled him. A look passed between Etta and Thomas, an unspoken alliance forming in their silence. Etta let the moment stretch. She traced the red cloth with her fingertip, then flicked it back to him. "They're looking," Merritt said to the others. "Not for shelter, not for blame, but for what your husband brought here and hid. Maps, I think, plants." A chorus of murmurs rippled through the cabin. Some faces flickered greed, then fear before returning to polite masks. Etta opened her mouth, but Thomas raised a hand, a quiet gesture that said, "Let her speak." She stepped toward Merritt, cloak brushing past cold wood. "You hunt ghosts," she said softly. "Or gold. One or the other." Merritt nodded. "Maybe both." She paused, studying him. "William was never a treasure hunter. Wolf calls his name. But I only buried one man. He was chasing hope." A creak echoed behind her. She turned just enough to meet Thomas's eyes. He was watching her like he'd known her words before they were spoken. She turned back to Merritt. "How much do you want?" she asked. "How much is a monk's grave worth?" He tilted his head, lips curling in half a smile. "Enough to lie for it." Silence filled the cabin, like snow smothering a valley. A realization settled in her chest. She was no longer just the shelterer. She was the center of a narrative that outweighed storms and forged alliances. She lifted her head. "If you want the map, if it even exists, you'll need more than brute. You'll need me." Thomas stepped forward, his voice low and firm. "We don't want violence. We want answers." Merritt's direct. But the rest of us, we followed. Etta nodded slowly. "Answers. I can give that. But not for free." Thomas flipped his coat back and tucked a hand into his pocket. "I agree." The cabin held its breath again. Men waited, skis of their boots creaking against wood. Merritt placed the handkerchief back in his coat pocket. "You owe me one night," he said to Etta, "for finding William. You owe me 10 years. She replied. He lifted an eyebrow, but didn't argue. Her terms were a slender lifeline stretching across the room. They stayed on her land. They worked for fuel. They worked for answers. No gun in her house unless it was pointed from the outside. Merritt's next words were measured. Fair. Will work. But we need more than this cellar need to find where he buried things. We'll search tomorrow. Etta folded her arms. She had her rules. She had her questions. But for the first time, she felt something rare in her chest: purpose. Not just survival, but weight. And she was ready. The men separated. Josiah slumped back by the stove. A few shoved coats aside to gather wood. Thomas merely stood, silent, offering space for her, watching. Etta went to the window, looking out at the drifting snow. She looked back at the men in her cabin. She thought of her past, the man she loved, the mountain that claimed him, the silence she'd lived in ever since. Now there was sound, a plan, a ghost of hope. She walked to Thomas and touched his arm lightly. You were going to search with them. He shook his head. I'll search with you. Her breath caught faint gratitude, a sharper line of trust. She nodded once. Not much said. Enough, later. As dusk fell, she found herself alone by the hearth again. The others were sorting wood in the front yard. That small cedar horse still sat on the mantel, untouched, its eyes dark. She wiped the dust off it and held it in her palm, feeling the grain, the smoothness. Her reflection wavered in the dim lamp above. She thought of the map Merritt chased, of her husband's secrets, of storms and scorch marks and handkerchiefs. She made a promise to herself she would find the truth buried under this land, but not for Merritt's gold, for William's memory, and whatever lay under 100 feet of snow. The cabin was hushed. Ember glow thinned in the stove, shadows drifting across the rough-hewn walls. The other men, Josiah, Merritt, a few others, had retreated into a restless sleep, the kind that never truly lands. That left only Etta and Thomas awake in the soft half-light, the one with no more lies left in her heart, the other no more running. Etta lit the single lamp by the hearth. It flared to life, sputtering once, revealing the gaunt angles of Thomas's face as he sat at the table, his hands clenched white around a tin cup that had stood untouched for half an hour. Come on in. Don't lurk, she said, voice steady but brittle. Thomas rose and joined her by the stove. The lantern perched above them, casting warm arcs through the cloud of their breath. Winter chill seeped around their ankles, ignored now in the sweep of intimacy. Her voice came slowly, each word deliberate. Thomas, tell me what happened. He exhaled sharply, like exhuming a truth buried too deep. I don't want lies between us. She leaned in, eyes hard bright. No more lies. He closed his eyes, as if to shut the world out, then opened them with tremor. That night, he began, voice hoarse, on the bluff. Sunset moonlight memory blurred in his mind, but emotion was sharp. William was there with Merritt. They were arguing about the maps. I stayed back. I didn't want to intrude. His hands found the table's grain and crushed it with quiet rage, turning inward. I watched. He whispered. William backed away. Then Jeremiah. I saw the look on Jeremiah's face. It wasn't an accident. Etta's breath hitched. Her hand slid to the edge of the table. She closed her eyes, hearing only his voice and the slow tick of the lamp. He shoved him. Her eyes snapped open. Words caught in her throat like sticks. Thomas swallowed, jaw tight. Just once. But enough. William fell back. He paused, pain pressing each syllable out of him. The ember hissed behind them, heat pressing. I ran, he said, flat. Too flat. Desperate to puncture the lie. I ran because because I thought they'd kill me too. Etta's voice trembled. You left him. He flinched as though struck. I didn't know what to do. You know how it is. Fear. His eyes glistened. It went silent. No wind. No blood rush. just his eyes, reaching. A shred of steel lifted in his words. He shifted on the chair, clasped his hands. I went back. That single phrase made the chair creak, the lamp pulse. The breath in the room was like a breath held too long. I carried him. He said, his voice dipped, closer to a panicked whisper. He closed his eyes, then opened them, searching hers. William was breathing, barely. His ribs moved. But he was dying. I don't know how. His voice shook the room. I held him. Blood soaked through his coat. I didn't know if he heard me. I said his name, just William, over and over. He didn't say he failed her, but the tremor said it all. What happened then? Etta asked. So quiet the word might have been lost. Thomas looked shattered. His next words were ragged. I buried him, no mercy, no ceremony, just shoved snow over him and left. I took his handkerchief. I thought it might mean something, but it didn't. He looked at her, eyes raw. Then Merritt found me. He said if I spoke, I was next. If anyone spoke, he'd see that neither of us left here alive. The lamp flickered. It felt like a heartbeat being pointed at their faces. Etta wrapped her arms around herself. Her lips trembled, not with rage, but with despair. She rose slow, each step measured, as though she carried lead in her soul. William is dead, she said, voice breaking. But I believed he fell. I believed the wind took him. A single tear fell. She wiped it away fiercely, like shredding the last shred of her composure. You believed that? Thomas's voice cracked. I lied to you too. She paused. Their eyes locked mine to yours. You carry mine to him. Blame twisted into grief. I buried him alone, she whispered, stepping back. I said goodbye with 4 planks I couldn't nail together. I talked to the ground, begged it to stay buried. Her words hung between them like splintered wood. Thomas stepped forward, hesitant. I'm sorry. I should have come forward. I would have told you. If they hadn't. His words dried on his lips. Etta closed her eyes, shattered. She dropped to her knees. The lantern swung overhead, lightning bright in that moment. You kept his death from me because their threat was louder than my right to say goodbye. Tears flowed, then no shame left in them. He deserved a proper burial. He deserved me to choose, not them. Thomas sank to one knee across from her. 2. I couldn't live with their. He couldn't say lies. He swallowed. But I want to help you now. I want to make it right. Her eyes met his. Again baying nights. Unspoken prayers. The anguish of knowing she'd lost not only him, but the truth of him. I don't know if I can stand next to the man who left my husband to die like that, she said thoughtfully. But I need to see it, what happened to him. Steeling herself, she stood, then held out a trembling hand. Show me the place, tomorrow. His breath fled, then rattled back. Yes, she nodded. He offered his hand. She took it, somewhere between fear and fragile hope. They sat like that for long beats, not lovers, uncertain allies bound by one brutal moment. The lamp guttered low above them. The embers glowed weakly, holding fast. Etta spoke at last, voice barely a whisper. I don't forgive it yet, but I don't condemn you either. Thomas's eyes glistened. Thank you. They rose together. The cabin seemed to exhale, as if it too had waited for the confession to pass. They moved toward the hearth, each conspiring with grief. Thomas lifted a log from the pile and set it gently into the stove. He didn't ask. He did. Etta watched, heart hammered but not broken anew. He glanced at her, seeking something beyond wrath. She gave him a nod. They both understood tomorrow. They would climb the bluff. They would face the wild. They would unearth William's last moments. And maybe, just maybe, they'd find the way to lay more than his body to rest. For now, there was only firelight, confession, and the fragile tether of trust. The snow outside had crusted into silence, the kind that swallowed breath and blurred time. Inside the cabin, Etta stirred from a shallow sleep, still wrapped in the uneasy quiet that followed truth laid bare. Morning was slow to rise, filtering through frost-bitten panes in slants of pale light. She stepped out onto the porch, pulling her shawl tighter, when she saw him collapsed in the snow near the fence line. A man, his robes stiff with frost, lips blue. Thomas, she called. He was there in seconds, crouching beside the figure. He's alive, Thomas murmured. Barely. They carried him inside. The other men rose from sleep, bleary-eyed and murmuring. The man groaned softly as he was laid near the hearth. A tarnished cross around his neck caught the firelight. A preacher, Josiah asked. The man opened one eye, cracked and red. They're coming, he rasped. The wolf in white, scripture on his lips, poison in his veins. Etta knelt beside him. Who are you, Reverend John Stetson? He whispered. Crooked Creek. I ran. They followed. Greed dressed in God's name. Merritt, from the corner, stepped forward. And what did you bring with you? Preacher, more damnation. Stetson didn't flinch. You know what damns a man, don't you? Merritt. It's not gold. It's what he does to get it. The tension in the room thickened. Merritt's jaw tensed. But he said nothing more. Later, after the preacher had been fed and wrapped in furs, he turned to Etta. He didn't just hide gold. Your husband. He buried secrets. One of them under this cabin. That was all the nudge Etta needed. She and Thomas slipped into the pantry, lifted the loose board beneath the shelves. The old cellar opened like a breath held too long. They climbed down slowly. The air was damp, metallic. Rusted chains still hung from stone bolts in the wall. Scratched into the timber was a name, Dakota. Etta Stewart, voice hollow. He kept someone down here. Thomas's face was grim. He said it was for leverage, interrogation. The man was native, proud, refused to talk. And you let him go, I did. Thomas whispered. Couldn't stand what we'd become. I gave him a coat. Told him to run north. Then I ran too. They climbed back up. The room was quieter now. The preacher dozed. Merritt stood near the stove, watching them. Well, he asked. Etta didn't answer. We're wasting time, he snapped. That map your husband hid, it's the key. We dig. We find. We split. You owe us that much. Etta's voice cut sharp. I don't owe you a damn thing. Stetson stirred. It's not about owing, he said softly. It's about reckoning. Your husband made choices. So did I. And so have you. Merritt took a step forward. You think this land belongs to you now? Widow Etta's eyes didn't waver. It always did. Merritt's smile was thin, dangerous. You want to lead this hunt, I will, she said. Because I'm not looking for gold. I'm looking for truth. I need to see with my own eyes what William buried. And face it. The room stilled. Even the wind outside seemed to pause. Thomas added, quietly, if there's going to be a search, I go with her. I've run long enough. Merritt considered them both. Fine, he said finally. But know this, we're not playing by campfire rules. You slow us down. You're out. No, Etta replied. You try to take what doesn't belong to you. You're out. Stetson smiled faintly. Well, I'll be damned. Or maybe not. If this lot finds Grace somewhere on the trail. Merritt turned sharply and walked to the window, staring out at the white hills. His fingers drummed against the frame. Ambition burned behind his eyes, like a fire he couldn't smother. Etta watched him, knowing the storm wasn't over. It had only just moved inside. The preacher spoke again, lower now, just for her. The man you buried, he had cracks in his soul. We all do. But some cracks hold seeds, and some just let the rot in. Etta looked to the cellar door, now shut tight again. She thought of Dakota, running barefoot into the dark woods, of her husband's boots pacing the boards above a man in chains. We're not chasing treasure, she said aloud. We're digging up consequences. And so the alliance was formed not out of trust, but necessity. Etta would lead. Thomas would follow. Merritt would circle like a hawk. And the preacher, he would stay behind. Perhaps to die, or to pray, or both. Outside, the sky bruised with dusk, the wolves were circling. But they weren't just in the woods, they were already inside. The dawn came too slowly, dripping crimson across the snow like spilled wine. The cabin felt fragile, as though the night had unraveled the seams of safety. Etta stood by the smoldering remains of last night's fire, the air heavy with betrayal. They had found it, a crudely drawn map in Merritt's satchel. Not the treasure chart they had hoped for, but a fake, ink-smeared. Bearings wrong. Under his breath, Josiah muttered, "This is no honest claim." Merritt caught the accusation, eyes hard as iron. "It's a placeholder," he said, "a red herring." He moved to calm the men. But their trust was fragile now. "There's no goat," Thomas said quietly, stepping forward. The circle broke between Etta and Merritt, between loyalty and doubt. One by one, they started to edge away. Even the preacher, bundled in blankets, whispered, "Without truth, men turn on each other." The argument erupted like dry tinder, words sharpened into weapons. Merritt's jaw flexed. "You think I'd play you all for fools? I had reasons." His voice shook, but the men around him saw the cracks. "Reasons?" Josiah spat. "To make women lead this." He looked at Etta. "She's the widow, should lead. You framed her with passion, but not trust." Merritt's fist slammed the table. The cabin shuddered. "This is still my land." "I thought it was hers," Etta said, stepping in, her voice steady but cold. "Because she's the only one who didn't hide behind plots." A gunshot rang sudden enough to stop every heart in the room. It came from outside, but the echo cracked the tension. Merritt backed a pace too many. "Stand down," he ordered. But the men had broken into two sides. Thomas moved to Etta. "We can't stay," he whispered. "This place isn't safe." At that moment, footsteps thundered. One among them collapsed. It was Josiah. Blood bloomed across the snow behind him. Someone had fired from concealment. The bullet took him through the shoulder, then the chest. He fell, gagging, eyes wild. Merritt went pale for the first time. He knelt beside his friend. Josiah coughed blood, crimson seeping into snow. He betrayed us." His voice rattled. Turned up Merritt's map. Etta felt the world spin. "This was to scare us off," she said, voice distant. "Someone wants the mine for themselves." Merritt rose, hands trembling. "We leave. No." He reached for his rifle, and admission she saw he'd lost control. But he waited. Night fell again like a shroud. The cabin, a burnt corner, smelled of smoke and ashes. Flicker of flames had licked at the south wall overnight. The charred beams collapsed with a groan. Whatever or whoever set it alight had one purpose: to force Delilah from her home. Etta watched Thomas work, hauling water and smothering the embers. Every motion he made was deliberate, protective. Sparks hovered in the ash like angry fireflies. She stood hush, but inside, her heart roared. Who would do this? She asked. Thomas didn't speak. He leaned into the smoke to pull down a sagging beam. Sweat dripped beneath his collar. At last he looked at her, ash on his cheek. Someone who knew this place mattered. A silence followed, a promise kindled between them in those shadows. Etta pressed into the charred corner, searching among collapsed floorboards. Her fingers brushed something ruffled beneath burnt paper. She pulled away ash and beams, uncovering an object, William's leather journal, singed but intact. Her breath caught. Thomas turned at the sound. Etta rose, journal held like a wounded child. They sat amid ruin and embers. He passed her a leather poncho to wrap it. Her thumb opened to the first page. William's handwriting wavered like distant thunder. If she ever reads this, I beg her forgiveness. I chased gold instead of love. I found the mine not for us, but for debts I owed another. Etta's eyes blurred. She read, revealing William's fears, hopes, and since his confession, a mine worth more than their cabin, but also a promise made to a mysterious woman from the north, someone he owed repayment. He spoke of waking at night, haunted by his own ambition. He had hidden the mine map to protect Delilah's innocence from greed, violence, and death. Trembling, Etta turned the page. I fear what I've become. I owe her more than the promise of prosperity. I owe her my better self. A quiet sob escaped her. Thomas wrapped his arm around her shoulder. She leaned into him, the journal trembling in her lap. Suddenly, creaking from the far wall, Merritt emerged in the haze of smoke and embers. He watched Etta, saw the journal in her hands. What he started. She didn't look up. He left more than gold here, she said softly. He left shame, hope, a debt to someone else. Merritt swallowed. He stepped closer. And will you leave this place, now that it's yours? She met his eyes. Steady. When I understand what he left behind. He nodded once. Men had hearts, too. She closed the book. Tears forgotten. We stay together. For Josiah. And for William's voice. Thomas nodded in agreement. Merritt inclined his head. He set his hand lightly on her shoulder, a gesture she recognized as respect, not ownership. Ash drifted around them. The cabin was broken. But they, whatever ragged group they were, felt something mend within the collapse. Outside, the snow lay thick. But Etta held William's journal like a compass. Their path was uncertain, but at least it was real. The wind had changed. Delilah Quinn could feel it in her bones. The way an old nail senses a coming storm. There was something in the silence between the men, sharp-edged, brittle. The snow had stilled. But it wasn't peace. It was the breath held before reckoning. The cabin stood solemn beneath a pewter sky, its scorched side still black from the fire that had licked through the pantry wall. Inside, the air carried the bitter scent of ash, and something else, tension coiled like a spring. Merritt stood by the stove, coat unbuttoned, eyes steady. He looked older today, not in years, but in weight. And when he spoke, his voice was quieter than usual, but clearer. You deserve to know why I'm here, he said. Delilah didn't speak. She stood near the table, one hand resting on the back of a chair, the other clenched at her side. I'm not here for gold, he continued. Not really. That was a lie easy enough to spread. Men will follow a map more readily than a ghost. The others glanced at each other, uncertain. Even Reddan, leaning against the far wall, narrowed his eyes. My name, Merritt said, is Merritt Langford. My younger brother was Elias Langford. He was a translator, a guide during the military campaigns against the native settlements. Delilah's breath hitched. He was killed. Merritt went on. During an interrogation gone wrong, the official word said it was a native uprising, an escape attempt. But that wasn't the truth. His eyes met hers. William killed him. Your husband. A silence settled over the room, so thick it drowned the creak of the rafters. Delilah's face froze not in denial, but in something deeper, a fissure cracking through the stone of certainty. No, she whispered. William told me he said they tried to save him, that it was chaos. He lied. Merritt stepped forward, slow, careful. He beat Elias, called him a traitor for showing mercy, said kindness was weakness. I read the field reports. I spoke to the medic who found the body. Elias had a crushed windpipe, rope burns on his wrists. William wrote in his own journal that soft men rot the spine of the frontier. Delilah's hand found the chair and gripped it hard. I came here, Merritt said, because I knew where he lived, where he ran to. After the campaign, after the blood, he brought his guilt with him to this cabin and buried it beneath snow and prayers. But guilt doesn't rot. It waits. She could barely breathe. Reddan pushed off the wall, his jaw taut by it. You waited all this time just to tell her. Merritt's gaze shifted. Sharp. No. I waited to finish what should have been done years ago. But it wasn't William who deserved it. Not only. It's the name. The legacy. People forget what men do when they put on uniforms and ride with flags. He turned back to Delilah. I watched him fall. Merritt said, 5 years ago. That day in the canyon. It wasn't an accident. The words struck like cold iron. Delilah's knees nearly gave. She steadied herself. You killed him. Her voice was brittle. I did. No apology, only fact. He was trying to hide something. A map. A name. I followed him. He slipped. Half turned. I pushed. It was easier than I thought it'd be. No fight in him. The chair fell over behind her. You murdered my husband, she said. He murdered my brother. They stood like statues in a house built on lies. Outside, the wind began to whisper again. Reddan moved closer. Eyes locked on Merritt, but Delilah raised a hand not to stop him, but to hold herself upright. What do you want from me? She asked. I'm not him. Merritt's face hardened. I want you to know the man you mourned. I want you to burn his memory down to the foundation, or live with it. Why now? She asked. Because grief rots, and the snow was finally deep enough to cover what I had to do. Delilah stared at him for a long time. Then she turned, walked to the mantel, and opened the drawer beneath the old ledger. Inside was a revolver Williams. She held it like an object from another life. Reddan stepped forward. Etta. But she didn't point it. She set it on the table, heavy and cold. I don't need this to end this, she said. Her voice had steadied. You're not going to kill me, Merritt. You're too tired, too broken, just like me. A flicker crossed his eyes, then silence outside. The snow began to fall again, slowly, like dust from an old ceiling finally giving way in the quiet. Merritt nodded once, not in victory, in surrender. He walked to the door, opened it, and left. No one followed. Reddan stood beside Delilah, but didn't touch her. She didn't cry. She didn't move. Only whispered, I thought the past was buried. But it was just frozen. He whispered back, now you can thaw it. And for the first time, she believed it might be true. A cold stillness settled over the cabin after Merritt's departure. The only sound was the soft hiss of falling snow and the quiet crackle of embers in the hearth. Delilah stood alone at the window, her breath fogging the glass, the weight of what she'd learned settling like ice around her heart. Reddan stayed close, looming behind her like a silent sentinel. Neither spoke. They both sensed the tension crackling in the air. Something was about to break, and neither wanted to force it prematurely. The quiet was shattered by an abrupt, sharp movement from the south wall. The embers there shifted, and a wisp of smoke curled through the rafters. That corner of the cabin, already scarred from the earlier blaze, flared to life again. Flames licked at charred beams, rekindling the smell of smolder and ash. Delilah swallowed, heart pounding. She didn't reach for the old revolver. Something deeper told her this confrontation belonged to Merritt, and her alone. She turned to Reddan, voice hushed. "Stay with me, whatever happens." Thomas nodded, eyes blazing. "I won't let them do it again." He moved to help dampen the fire, throwing blankets and blankets of snow, and within moments, the flames retreated into glowing coals. Yet in Delilah's chest, a fire refused to die. They stayed by the hearth until Merritt's boots crackled on the porch. He returned, a storm draped over his shoulders, steps deliberate and heavy. His coat flapped like a dark flag. Reddan stood beside Delilah, violent but watchful. Merritt surveyed the damaged charred logs, smoldering blankets, dampened fire, and finally looked to Delilah. "She used to love this place," he said quietly. "Maybe it's time to let it burn." Delilah swallowed, grief and anger interlacing. "You set this?" she asked softly, stepping forward. "To scare me off?" Merritt didn't deny it. His jaw clenched. "I told you no gold matters anymore. But that place, your home, is a shrine to his lies. I had to test your faith, see if you were still tied to him, or ready to be reborn." She shook her head, tears glimmering. "You used fire. You taught me a lesson with flames. But I will not be your lesson." Outside, wind scratched the roof. Fire life still glowed in the embers. Reddan watched Merritt go still. Then Delilah raised her head, voice ringing with purpose. "And now we confront it, not bury it again. You want truth, we cut it open in daylight." Merritt's eyes flashed something: resentment, fear, respect. He reached a hand toward the photograph of William and Etta on the mantel. Something inside him shook. Reddan stepped forward sharply. "If she wanders from this place, she doesn't go alone. And she certainly doesn't go because you flicked a match." Merritt turned on Reddan. "Who asked you?" Thomas stood his ground. "Someone had to." Delilah stepped between them. The old revolver sat in her hand, though still unraised. "There's one thing we can do now," she said. "We dig. We find the cellar. We expose what's hidden. You warned me I could burn it down. I choose to dig it up instead." Merritt hesitated, breathing in the acrid air. His shoulders slumped slightly as though he'd been holding the sky up with them. "Fine," he said, voice rough. "We dig for the truth." Outside the cabin, the wind hurtled through bare trees, carrying ghost echoes of betrayal and atonement. Inside, the group assembled quietly by the hatch in the floor. Delilah met Merritt's gaze. "They'll see who's right here, who stands for more than money, more than lies." Merritt nodded once. The hunt for gold had died beneath the ashes. Now they were digging for something darker, but far more real: justice, forgiveness, and reckoning. The dawn arrived pale and quiet, casting long silver streaks over the scorched remains of the cabin. A cold wind stirred the ashes, whispering the old pain that still clung to the timbers. Yet beneath that hush, something else stirred in urgency, a breathless anticipation. Delilah Quinn stood before the trapdoor in the cabin floor, her hand gripping a cold iron latch. The others stood nearby, eyes watchful, breaths held, as if they too could feel the weight pressing up from below. Beside her, Thomas Reddan remained still, the kind of stillness that speaks not of fear, but of readiness. Merritt was behind them, arms crossed, jaw tense, But something flickered behind his eyes, doubt, or perhaps dread. Delilah opened the trapdoor. The cellar air hit them like the past itself, musty, cold, sharp with dust. Together, they descended into the hidden chamber beneath the cabin. It was narrow, built of stone and shadow, with frost crawling along the edges of the walls. In the far corner, partially buried under soot and time, lay a small metal box. Delilah knelt beside it and lifted it gently. The latch resisted. It clicked. The lid creaked open. Inside lay time frozen in confession, a weathered journal, a hand-drawn map on cracking parchment, 2 sealed letters, and a bundle wrapped in soft leather. She reached first for the journal. Its cover bore William's handwriting, familiar even through grime. Her fingers trembled as she opened it. The entries were short, clipped. They spoke of fear, regret, of a choice made not to save himself, but someone else. She turned to the map. It was the real one. Markings that matched no counterfeit. A mine, a trail, a hidden ravine, truth layered in ink and desperation. One letter was addressed to her, the other to Merritt. She handed Merritt his silently. He opened it with shaking hands. To Merritt, if you're reading this, I didn't kill Dakota. I considered him a brother. I hid his body to prevent more blood from being spilled. If they found him, they would have used him to justify more death, more hatred. I couldn't let that happen. The silence afterward was different now, heavy. Not with blame, but with shattered belief. Reddan moved toward a dark corner of the cellar, knelt beside a pile of disturbed earth. He brushed away debris, revealing part of a weathered belt and what remained of a body long decayed. There was a broken eagle bone necklace, dulled with time. That's Dakota, Reddan whispered. Merritt stepped forward, slowly. His boots scraped against stone. He stared at the remains for a long, long time. Delilah watched his face, the hardness drained. His shoulders slumped. He knelt beside the body of his brother, not with anger, but grief. I hated him, he said hoarsely, for dying, for being there, for what came after. I thought William killed him. You pushed William, Delilah said softly. He didn't deny it. I saw the guilt in his eyes and fed it with my own. I made him a monster, so I wouldn't be one. The box lay open between them, secrets finally aired, old wounds bleeding clean. Delilah rested a hand on the edge of the box. You spent your life chasing ghosts, Merritt. But he wasn't your enemy. Merritt's eyes brimmed, but he did not cry. His grief was silent, settled in the way his hand trembled as it touched the bones. They remained there for a long time, the wind above howling over the hills. When they emerged, it was as if the weight of the mountain had shifted. And yet, the reckoning had only just begun. Late afternoon light slanted through the battered rafters of the cabin, spilling across the scorched floorboards in long golden streaks. The place was no longer the haven it once had been. Its walls bore wounds of fire and betrayal, but to Delilah, it still breathed something authority. Each crack in the wood, each smoke-stained beam, whispered a truth that was finally free. In the middle of the room, half buried in ash, the real map remained. She knelt and picked it up with slow hands. The parchment fragile, almost translucent. Thomas Reddan stood nearby, watching, but said nothing. Delilah looked at the map a moment longer, then without hesitation, dropped it into the remnants of the hearth. Flames caught quickly, curling the edges into black ribbons. This was never what mattered, she murmured. Her voice was steady now, no longer shaped by the tremor of fear or doubt. What's worth keeping? It's already here. Reddan stepped forward, offering her a mug of hot tea. steam spiraling upward between them like a quiet blessing. Outside, the snow still clung to the branches, but the earth beneath was beginning to show. Drips fell steadily from the eaves, the slow release of winter's final grip. They stood in silence, side by side, until their hands found each other, his large, calloused fingers closing around hers with no need for promise or oath, only presence. Delilah felt the warmth of it seep into her chest, not like fire, but like sunlight through frost. It was enough. In the days that followed, they worked together to rebuild. The broken windows were replaced with salvaged glass, the singed beams reinforced, the old door rehung with care. The cabin would never be the same, and that was the point. It had survived the storm. And so had they. One evening, after sweeping the last of the soot from the hearth, Delilah looked around and breathed deep. The air no longer carried the scent of smoke and sorrow, but of pine and thawing earth. Reddan was crouched near the window, adjusting a shutter, and when he stood, their eyes met. "Spring will come soon," he said. Delilah nodded, watching the snow recede from the porch steps. "And so will hearts," she replied softly. That morning, long after the others had gone, some back to their scattered lives, some simply disappearing into the land, Delilah stood in the doorway of the rebuilt cabin. Her hair hung loose around her shoulders, lit by the soft gleam of early sun. In one hand, she cradled a tin mug of warm tea. In the other, her fingers rested calmly in Reddan's, steady, quiet, certain. They said nothing. There was no need. The forest beyond had shed its silence. Birds called from the branches, and water trickled beneath melting snowbanks. The thaw had begun, not only of earth and season, but of hearts long frozen. The pain was not gone, but it had softened, like ice breaking into slow-moving streams. The cabin behind them was no longer just a place of ghosts. It had become a threshold, a hearth reborn through truth, forgiveness, and the choice to remain. They didn't look forward. They didn't speak of tomorrow. But as they stood in that golden hush, side by side, something warm settled between them, not as a fire rages, but as it endures. And in that quiet, the story did not end. It simply opened into something else, something beginning. Now it's your turn. If, on a winter night, a snowstorm howled through the forest and the fire in your cabin was just enough to keep a small room warm, then 11 strangers, dusty, worn, carrying the cold and their secrets, knocked on your door asking for shelter, with no weapons in sight. Would you open the door, or protect yourself instead? This isn't just a dramatic scenario. It's a test of compassion, of fear, and of the fine line between survival instinct and human kindness. Etta Moore wasn't a hero from the history books. She was a Western widow, her husband lost to mystery, living alone among the frozen mountains. She knew fear, and that's exactly why her choice to open the door wasn't born of ignorance. It came from understanding that in a storm, death doesn't always come from letting strangers in, but from letting fear freeze your heart. She laid down rules, she kept control, but she chose not to shut her humanity away. If you were her, what would you choose? Let us know in the comments. And remember, in the Wild West, survivors weren't always the strongest, but those who dared to stay human, even in the storm.